Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Wanakashima Anna, student from the International University of Management. I'm back again with a module of research methodology. I'm still on the same chapter, which is literature review. Today we're gonna look at the 7 gaps of literature review. So what is a gap in literature review? The gap, also considered as a missing piece or pieces in the research literature, is the area that has not yet been explored or is underexplored. This could be the population or a sample, research method, data, data, data collection, and or analysis or other research variable or conditions. We have 7 research gaps. We have an evidence gap, we have knowledge gap, we have practical knowledge gap, we have methodology gap, empirical gap, then we have theoretical gap, and also population gap. So what is an evidence gap? Evidence gap, a starting expectation, creates an evidence gap when a new research finding contradicts widely accepted conclusions. This gap is caused by the inconsistency in previous research findings. It arises when study data allow for conclusion in and of themselves, but they're contradictory when considered from a more abstractive perspective. The process of identifying contradicting evidence begins with an examination of each research area. The findings of this analysis must then be combined in order to uncover the contradicting evidence. Evidence gap is also known as a contradictory evidence gap. So evidence gap, okay, this is the process of identifying contradicting evidence. Begin with an examination of each research area. The finding of this analysis must then be combined in order to uncover contradicting evidence. So we move on to the knowledge gap. The knowledge gap is a common gap in previous research. There are 2 conditions in which a knowledge gap or a knowledge void might exist. First, it's possible that the actual field lacks an understanding of theories and literature from a related research field. Secondly, it is possible that the study findings are different from what was predicted. So knowledge gap is also known as a knowledge void gap. So this is just a picture and a short summary of what I've said in the previous slide. So we move on to the practical knowledge conflict gap. This kind of gap serves as an inspiration of new research in the field. When an expert behaves differently than what they supposed, a practical knowledge, which is an action knowledge, conflict the results. In this situation, the purpose of the research might be determined the scope of the conflict and its causes. Practical knowledge is also known as a conflict gap or an action knowledge conflict gap. So this one is also just a short summary. So what I have mentioned in the previous is the purpose of the research might be determined by the scope and the conflict and its causes. So the purpose of this gap might or the purpose of the research might be determined might 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 be to determine the scope of the research of the conflict and its causes. So we move on to the next one, which is the empirical gap. This kind of gap, this kind of gap, the kind of gap that addresses gaps in previous research is an empirical gap. This gap relates to study conclusion or claims that needs to be assessed or experimental confirmed. For instance, concern that no study has clearly attempted to an to examine a subject or a topic from an empirical method are frequently addressed by an empirical gap. The empirical gap is also known as an evaluation void gap. So, um, this is also just a picture that shows some things that I've mentioned in the previous slide. We have an example here. We say concerns that no study has clearly attempted to examine a subject or topic for an empirical method or frequently addressed by empirical uh, gap. We move on to the next one, which is a theoretical gap. This is the type of gap known as the type of gap known as a theoretical gap is one that deals with the gaps between theory and early research. For instance, a gap conflict might exist if different theoretical models are, are being used to describe the same fact or phenomena, much like a methodological gap conflict. Scholars could evaluate which of those theories are more superior in terms of the gap in an existing body of the knowledge. When analyzing previous research on a phenomena or fact, theoretical gaps are frequently used. The, the theoretical gap is also known as theory application void gap. This is also just a short summary and it's having a cartoon, so it's giving us more about the theoretical gap. We move on to the methodological gap, which is a kind of gap that addresses contradiction that arises as a result of the methodology's influence on the study finding. The gap examine the issues with the research methodologies used in early studies and present a brand new research direction divides from that divides from those research methods. It emphasizes that it may be beneficial to use a variety of research methods practically. In practical studies, topics have been investigated using a single or common method. A methodological gap is also known as methodology void gap. As mentioned in the previous slide, that this gap addresses the contradictions that arise as a result as a result the result of methodology influences on study findings. We move on to the last slide, the last gap, which is the population gap. A common gap discovered by researchers is a population gap. There are always populations that are underserved, and understudied. This gap is a type of population-related research population, such as gender, race, age, that is either not well represented in the evidence base or under the researched. Population gap is also known as an under-researched subgroup gap. Population gap, also known as an under-researched subgroup gap. The population that are undeserved and unstudied. Population-related research populations such as gender, race, age, that is either not well represented in an evidence base or under-researched. So in conclusion, I would give this table as on the first table we have the research gaps. Then in the second table we have the types of research gaps used. Let's look at the evidence gap. The study results in encouraged and do not support conclusion in their own right is seen from other abstract perspectives. The knowledge gap, the deserved research results are not available. The practical knowledge gap, professional behavior or procedures differ from research conclusions or are not investigated by the researchers. Empirical gap, empirical testing for research conclusion or hypothesis is required. Then we have theoretical gap. To develop new insight, theory should be applied to the specific research problem. A gap exists because there is a lack of theory. Then we have a methodological gap, which is it is vital to use a variety of research methods to produce new insight or to prevent inconsistent results. Then we have population gap, research pertaining to the population that is not sufficiently represented or under-researched in the evidence-based or early research. So we have come to the end of our chapter. So we thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for taking time to go through all my slides. I really appreciate. Please do not forget to like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Thank you everyone. See you in our next chapter. Bye.